When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Want to listen to this Ivory Tower Boiler Room episode ad-free? Head on over to our Patreon, where you will get this episode and all of our episodes ad-free. And you can see our video episode, including this one right now, where you'll see my beautiful face and the guest's beautiful face. Who doesn't love that? And I am so excited to announce that all of you can get a 1-week free trial on our Patreon. Join the ITBR professor level and you unlock all of Mary's True Crime and Academia Patreon episodes, our rewatch show, including Queer as Folk and Smash. You can even listen to us dissect Scream and The Exorcist. So head to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room, join the 1-week free trial, and see what you're missing out on. And while you're at it, please follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Rate, follow, and subscribe to us on Apple and Spotify podcasts. Thanks so much, and I hope that you enjoy all of our Ivory Tower Boiler Room episodes. Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and when I'm not here on the podcast, I am consulting with small businesses, undergraduate students, graduate students, podcasters, and those in media. So if you're curious about the work that I've done with my consultation services, you could just type me in on Google, Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and you'll see a few reviews pop up. I've worked on college admission essays for undergraduate students. I've revamped and expanded a small business's social media marketing campaign right here in Port Jefferson, New York. And I've also worked on a graduate student's thesis for her physician assistant program. So if you want to seek me out or inquire about my consultation services, just email me. That's the easiest way to reach me at ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com. That's easy to remember. And 'tis the season for college admission essays, both undergraduate and graduate, thesis writing, dissertation writing. Do you want to create a podcast and you don't know where to begin? Media work, how to open a TikTok, how to start creating videos on TikTok, what to do with your Instagram. All of that I have done. So just reach out to me.
Hey, true crime friends. Welcome back to another episode of True Crime in Academia. With me, I have the most amazing group of people. I am so excited about this. First of all, we have a host of Ivory Tower Boiler Room /founder /owner /creative director /everything, Andrew Rimby. Hey, Andrew.
Hi, Mary.
Then we have one of our repeat guests, one that I'm very excited who's here, and she's not the only repeat guest, which, again, also very exciting for me. She is the host and founder of the podcast Revealing the Ivory Tower, and she is also a consulting psychologist and an advocate for students who are victims of academic abuse. Dr. Mack. Hey, Dr. Mack. Welcome back.
Hello. Is academia its own cult? I don't know. I will defer to Dr. Gideon.
We might figure that out today. Who knows? And first time to this podcast, we have Dr. Quincee Gideon. She is a religious and cult trauma psychologist, consultant, educator. and founder of quite a few websites I found. Trauma Mastery, which is a website that offers educational resources as well as psychological services for those suffering with specifically religious and cult trauma, as well as Woven Trauma Therapy, which again offers psychological services and education on trauma in general. Welcome, Dr. Quincee Gideon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. What a privilege.
And also repeat guest, Dr. Lina Haji. She is the creator of Rise Psychology channel on YouTube and was featured on true crime documentaries and docuseries such as Lights, Camera, Scream, and most recently, The World's Most Evil Prisoners. Welcome, Dr. Haji.
Hi, Dr. Haji. I'm late because I've been sick for a week and I'm kind of discombobulated, but this is who I am as a human. So I don't know why people ask me to be on podcast, but I'm honored by it. Thank you. I apologize. Hi.
No worries.
Okay, we're good.
Thank
yeah,
you for
Mary's
being
going right
here.
into the first question, so you're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of am curious to see what your all different takes on this question are, but at what point does a religious group or a religious extremist group become a cult? Like, what is the fine line between the two? Because I find them to myself to be kind of interchanged, but obviously that's not always the case.
Well, I'll start by saying that by having Dr. Gideon here, I just feel like whatever she says, I'll just nod. But I think that I see where you're coming from. I see why people would think that they're interchangeable. But I don't think that's exactly accurate. I think there's an authoritarianism component in the cult that is not necessarily in a religion. There's also like lack of tolerance for questioning and criticism, which you can also find in some extreme religions. I think those are two of the major differences, but I will defer to the experts here.
I can jump in here. We don't exactly know. Research has not been super clear because a lot of these groups, while people are in it, aren't open to being researched. So we're just going to always have limited information. But here's what we're kind of guessing, that some religious groups can become cults, mostly because they become really coercive. They do not give people a lot of choice. They start trying to control way more areas of life than they really have access to or should have access to. And the punishment gets really high, right? When someone defects or doesn't follow the rules or whatever. But in saying that, not all cults are religious. So we really sort of have to kind of pay attention to the details. And that's why it's really important to be really thoughtful and have good conversations about each of these groups that we learn about, because every single one of them is going to be pretty nuanced. Like there's some things that happen in a lot of different groups, and we can sort of say like, yeah, that's culty behavior, or yeah, that's really extremist, that's moving, into the cult arena. But we don't actually know exactly how to define this stuff, because one of the things that has happened over kind of history is that the word cult has been misused. So like if you like a skincare, we call it a cult classic. If you like a movie, we use the word cult around it. And because of that, the term has not been very clear, and research has a really hard time researching or defining anything that is unclear. So we really have to get really, really clear about the term cult, and then we'll be able to start researching it really well.
Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about one of our ITBR sponsors, Broadview Press. Broadview Press is an independent academic publisher in the humanities that produces high-quality, pedagogically useful books for use in university and college classrooms. They publish mainly in English studies, writing, philosophy, and history. They are always publishing with an eye towards diversity, building a strong list of titles from women, people of color, and authors from other marginalized groups. If you haven't heard my Broadview Press interviews, you need to. Recently, I just had on Dr. Shannon Day, who talked about her book, Beyond the Binary, Thinking About Sex and Gender. And in the summer, I had on Dr. Jason Holt, who gave us all a comprehensive history of what it means to be a philosopher who studies sporting culture. And of course, we went back to ancient Greek literature, mythology, history to look at the roots of athleticism. And last year, I had on Dr. Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock, who's actually going to be coming on the podcast soon to give his thoughts on the new Fall of the House of Usher Netflix series. He talked all about pop culture for beginners. And Broadview Press is offering an exclusive discount because of our sponsorship. So head to broadviewpress.com where you're going to see such a wide range of literature. Use the code Ivory Tower, IVORYTOWER for 20% off site-wide all of their books. Again, it's broadviewpress.com. Enjoy your reading. Are you a fan of LGBTQ plus books, plays, movies, TV shows? Well, then I have the magazine for you. It's called The Gay and Lesbian Review. The GNLR is a bi-monthly magazine of history, culture, and politics that publishes essays in a wide range of disciplines, as well as a slew of reviews of books, plays, and movies. Each issue brings you consistently intelligent, lively, thought-provoking articles focused on a unifying theme, and it brings together the leading minds on the topic. So I just had on Dr. Richard Schneider Jr., the founder and editor-in-chief of the GNLR. For the GNLR's 30th anniversary, happy birthday, GNLR, Dr. Richard Schneider talked about their special volume called Outer Appearances, More Faces from the Annals of the GNLR, illustrations by Charles Heffling. They cover current LGBTQ artists such as Harvey Fierstein, Melissa Etheridge, Alan Cumming, James Whiteside, Alison Bechdel, and even David Sedaris, and of course, many others like Stephen Sondheim. There's even a supplemental issue that comes with your commemorative volume. And Andrew Halloran, the writer of Dancer from the Dance, he reviews a book called Morris about E.M. Forster's Morris, written by one of our ITBR guests, David Grevin. So we can't wait for you all to experience this beautiful 30th anniversary GNLR issue. Have you heard some of my GNLR interviews, including Dr. Andrew Lear's discussion about male-male love in ancient Greek society and Ignacio Darnad opening and blasting the closet door in the queer male art world? Well, definitely make sure you listen to them after this episode. Head to glreview.org. Make sure you subscribe to their magazine. You'll see there's a section that says subscribe at the top. Enter the promo code ITBR50. That's ITBR50 to receive 50% off. 50% off any print or digital subscription. Enjoy your reading. LGBT stories are universal, but each one speaks to the individual heart and soul of the writer telling it. Do you have a story to tell? Or have you been moved by an LGBT book, film, painting, television show, or other form of media? Then the Gay and Lesbian Review wants to hear from you. The GNLR believes in bringing awareness to queer art and artists through reviews, commentary, and thought pieces in which the author relates their personal lives to a particular piece of art, a novel, a movie. In addition to the print magazine, the GNLR also publishes articles on its blog. So you can see all of this on glreview.org. That's glreview.org. Remember, you get 50% off your subscription of the GL Review magazine when you use the promo code ITBR50. That's 50% off your print or digital subscription when you use promo code ITBR50. To learn more about submitting an article for the GNLR, visit their writer's guidelines. The link is located at the bottom of their homepage. And if you have any questions, email Stephen Hemrick. That's STEPHEN HEMRICK@glreview.org. The GNLR and its readers can't wait to see what you have to say. Hi, everyone. Happy almost holiday season. Because the holidays are upon us, I'm sure so many of you out there are thinking, oh my, what am I going to get my friends, my family, my children, my romantic partner, my husband, my wife, any, significant person in your life? Look no further than my good friend Mandy Bengal, who makes handmade crocheted items. Her company is called Mandy Made It. You can follow her on Instagram at MANDEE Made It. And you will see all of these crocheted items that she's going to be able to customize for you, including special characters, sports team figures, even holiday items like a snowflake or a Christmas tree. So I have Mandy's keychains. I have the poison apple from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I have a rainbow flag that she made me. So Mandy is able to really customize an order just depending on what your hobbies and passions are and what item you're really looking for. So because you're listening to me talk about Mandy, she said that anyone who goes to Mandy Made It on Instagram and orders from her and they've heard the Ivory Tower Boiler Room ad, she will give you all a free Ivory Tower Boiler Room t-shirt with your order. So head right now to Mandy Made It. If you were really looking for that special gift, now you don't have to look any further because I have you covered with Mandy Made It. Okay, I hope you all enjoy your items from Mandy Made It. And please make sure that you take a photo of your crocheted items so that we can share it out on our social media. I know Mandy would love that, and I would love to see what you all are ordering from her. She even has an adorable pillow called Netflix and Chill, and she has these cute coasters that she crochets for your favorite coffee or tea mug. So enjoy all your Mandy Made It products. Yeah,
That is
like I'm
so
also
fascinating.
I'm so curious because I'm like coming from that academic
Yeah.
PhD mentality, like also Dr. Gideon, which I'm sure Dr. Mack would jump on board too, is like when does like group mores or norms or even like health and wellness during the pandemic, there was like hot yoga, which I had done before, like Bikram himself and like him being so manipulative. Like, is a cult defined by being in a sect and having specific societal group thinking that the outsiders are not privy to this insider knowledge? And then, you know, the outside is seen as um, uneducated or the enemy or, because they're not as enlightened as you, um, they need to be taken in, and you now need to somehow bring those outsiders in. And if they don't want to come, especially if they're your friends, then you should discard them.
Yes. So most groups, not all, but most of these culty groups have an in group versus an out group kind of psychology. If you're in, and you have access to knowledge, you have access to the healing that they're offering, you have access to something that outsiders don't have access to, and therefore are a little bit less than or need to be saved, right? That's how a lot of like evangelical religions work, is that those over there don't understand. And so they need to be brought in and they need to be saved. And so a lot of them will sort of work like that. They have a group identity. They have this idea or this like morality that they circle around. Everyone kind of gets on board with that. You get in trouble if you don't follow those rules. Most of the people inside of a culty group would say that. I would say that the exception to that is QAnon. And we don't really know why it works the way that it does, but it's a lot of group think. It's a lot of culty thinking. There's a lot of coercive control, a lot of fear, and violence is used to motivate the members, but there's not this like central identity. There's not this like group that meets. There's not this leader other than maybe Q. Like there's not like this centralized sort of functioning. And so it is still having some of the same impacts, but it's functioning very differently. So That would probably be the exception right now that I can think of.
Now, what characteristics or traits make people more susceptible to joining a religious slash cult versus maybe those who start them or people who are just like, I don't know. I'm not about this.
Yeah, this is fascinating. So I'd love to hear what you think. Who joins a cult?
I generally, from just the research that I've done on different types of cults for cases, it always seems to be people who are experiencing some sort of pain that they're trying to have this group cult, fill, whether it's religiously or just the community aspect of it.
Yeah, a lot of people kind of walk around feeling like cult members are gullible, or they're highly influenceable, or they are like broken in some way. They're super traumatized. Like there's kind of rhetoric out there, but research actually shows something different. They're typically middle class. They typically grew up in either a super high control religion or they had no religion at all. Those sort of middle grounders don't get sucked in. They're usually highly intelligent and not easily impacted by things outside of wanting the world to be a better place. Most people that join a group like this have had some sort of experience where they really identify with really wanting to change the world. Like some pain has happened to them, their family has gone through something, and this group is now offering the thing that they need access to, right? And no one else seems to be able to do that. That seems to be mostly what kind of makes people vulnerable to joining a high control group. The other two factors that happen over and over and over again is that they're in some sort of life transition. So after a divorce, after a baby, moving college is a huge one, when you're like leaving everything that you know and moving into like a new environment. Or some big life event has happened in typically 3 to 4 months before they join. So like a death or some big trauma has happened, some assault has happened, like something that has really disrupted the way that they see the world as either safe or unsafe. And they usually go looking for a group that will help them feel safe.
What would you say some of the main characteristics of the people who start cults, like Jim Jones, Marilyn Manson, people like that? Like what is it about them that make people really just want to do everything they say?
I would love to take that one because my expertise is psychopathy. So again, I think Dr. Gideon probably has a better answer, but from a forensic psych perspective, when you look at these leaders, and I was a Bikram teacher for years, and then I saw that documentary and was like, okay, and that's when they switched it all to calling it hot yoga. But anyway, the thing that they have in common, and I'm glad that Dr. Gideon pointed out that it's not just religious cults, that there are like different kinds of cults and terroristic cults and stuff like that. And when I think of something similar to cults in my personal experience, I think a lot of gangs, especially juvenile gangs, but I digress. But I see usually leaders that are high on psychopathy in the sense that they have lack of remorse, very selfish and self-centered, high on narcissism. They have that superficial charm where they're able to really, pull people in, and, just kind of do whatever they need to do to get their needs met. So this isn't the psychopath that we think of like a Jeffrey Dahmer or a Ted Bundy, but a very, I don't like to use the word high functioning, but a high functioning, not necessarily engaging in overt or out there criminal activity, but still very narcissistic and psychopathic. That's the way I view most leaders of these cults. And again, a lot of the other thing, sorry, I'm bouncing all over the place. The other thing I thought was really interesting that Dr. Gideon touched on was I had a misconception that people in cults were maybe not as intelligent, very gullible, and I'm kind of ashamed that that was what I thought. Like, oh, these poor people, they're being preyed upon. And then I did a little bit of research preparing for this, and I saw that that's not the case. you know, and that makes sense to me in a forensic context because I see very intelligent juveniles joining gangs, and you're like, wait, that kid is super smart. Why is he joining this gang? Because it's really, it's correlation, not causation, and it gets complex. So that's the way I view cult leaders: high on psychopathy, high on narcissism, a lot of superficial charm, willing to go to any lengths to get their needs met.
Some grooming to kind of get people like kind of that step by, like you said, it's not overt, kind of, it's like abusive relationships where if there was a big neon sign, these smart people would clearly say, ooh, I'm good, I'm gonna, so slow increments. And I think Dr. Gideon, you were mentioning that earlier, like on the punishment side, and it kind of seems like that on the kind of trying to recruit or sell themselves. And the life events thing, I'm trying to think of couple documentaries recent, even like Twin Flames or Teal Swan. A lot of the people on there like had gone, they felt lost, just wayward. They lost alignment with their values or whatever their goals were. So yeah, it totally makes sense. And I also think of superficial charm. I mean, how to be the ultimate salesman, really, to kind of pull people in.
Yeah, I think of, and I'm not going to remember her name, but there was this really amazing memoir done of like the survivor of Jim Jones. I think it actually was the woman who had like an affair with Jim Jones, who was able to, like, she found a way to leave.
Yeah.
And like
her
that
sister.
yeah,
Both
exactly.
of them were interviewed. Yeah.
So like that deprogramming that happens, like thinking of, I mean, I'm just thinking now of Bikram, you know, Lina, but that there's this almost like a pyramid symbolism where like all the beginners are at the bottom, and Leah Remini really talks about that psychology of bringing the family and the mother, and her stepfather is already in Scientology. But I think it's so interesting of how you need to work your way up the pyramid scheme and like getting that approval. And maybe that's where I kind of see how academia and the Ivory Tower can be part of that, but I'm still kind of wrestling with, our academics really as like charming? Like, are they a Jim Jones? Like, I don't know if they really succeed in academia, like that really over the top selling something, because you do still have to have research, and you know, you can't be too egotistical. Like, you can't be out of not having facts to back you up. But I could see maybe, like, what's the difference between a toxic workplace and a corporation and a cult? Like, do they share similarities? So you all know that I am such a fan of musical theater and classic movies. So I can't wait for you all to listen to one of my good friends' podcasts. It's called That Old Gay Classic Cinema, hosted by Christian Garcia. It's a podcast that looks at classic cinema films that we know and love. And he was inspired by Turner Classic Movies and The Great Movie Ride. Remember that amazing ride where the Wicked Witch of the West rose up in a burst of flame in Disney? That was one of my favorite rides. I'm so sad it closed. So while looking at classic films, Christian is so excited to look at it with a queer lens. And he brings on friends like myself to talk about all of these films. I was on the first episode when we discussed The Sound of Music. I've been on an episode of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. He just released an episode about the Philadelphia Story. He's done Meet Me in St. Louis, Sweet Charity, Psycho, Mary Poppins, Hello, Dolly. He had on Down the Yellow Brick Road hosts and the Garland Gab hosts to talk about The Wizard of Oz. So make sure that you listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema on Apple and Spotify, and follow him on TikTok and Instagram at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. Okay, start watching the classic movies and make sure you listen to Christian's podcasts. I am here in Port Jefferson, New York, on Long Island, in one of my favorite stores. It is the Soapbox NY, a bath and body boutique. I'm here with one of the co-owners, Janine. Hi, Janine.
Hi, Andrew. How are you? Thank you.
Good. So I know you have many winter scents to walk us through. So let's
Yes.
get started.
This is from company Michelle Design Works, another one of our favorites. room spray that you can use any room in your house, just kind of freshens up the room a bit.
Then what is this by Michelle
Also by
Design
Michelle Design Works is Winter Blooms, one of their new scents this holiday season. It's great. It's a hand wash. You can use it in your kitchen or your bathroom.
And then
And
here's something to follow it up with.
exactly. It's a hand and body lotion.
And then what is this beautiful decorative candle here?
One of our favorites that we actually sell
Mhm.
all year round because it's so popular. This is the scent of Fraser Fir by Times.
I think I'm becoming addicted to it.
Yes, I think you are because you already own one, I believe.
I own one, and it is a decorative candle for me because I'm about to open it, but it's just in such
I know the
a
packaging
beautiful
is, I don't know what's better,
package.
the packaging or the scent,
I'm
but
using
it's
it as a
wonderful.
holiday decoration. So
Cool.
I'll get to the candle eventually,
Yes, you
everyone.
will. But it's wonderful because with Times and their Fraser Fir, not only do they carry the candles, but they also make it in the scents in the diffuser, in soap, the hand lotion, the hand soap. It's just a great line and a great scent.
So, Janine, how can everyone out there get their hands on your hand and body and even pajama products?
Well, we'd be more than happy to see you in our shop. We're located at 18 Chandler Square in Port Jefferson Village. You could always call us to place an order. We're happy to ship to you. Our phone number is 631-509-1424. You can place an order on our website, soapboxny.com. And you could also find us on Instagram or TikTok at the Soapbox NY.
So many options.
Mhm.
I can't wait for all of you out there to just enjoy what I love so much about the Soapbox NY. So, with
Yeah,
that,
thank you so much.
happy winter, everyone.
Yeah, and I would say in academia, you have to, it's not just that their work product maybe isn't culty. It's how they treat TAs. It's how they grade papers. It's how the students are able to have access. I had a professor in my grad school. I long for the day that he is fired because there was like a very small group of men that had access to him. They played Fortnite all the time. They went over to his house. His wife cooked them dinner. They were always the top pick for TA-ship, even though like there were so many other people doing excellent work and submitting for grants, and like we were doing the work. We were never going to have access. He also was a part of the clinical training program. And so all of those cronies got all the best clinical placements. And the rest of us were like, I guess I won't get that coveted placement because I'm not in the inner circle. So it's not just the work product, because I would say that this guy was like a pretty prolific writer and everyone would sort of say he's super humble. It's also what happens in how his relationships played out and the ways in which he had a lot of power that he used to coerce people to do his bidding without them really feeling like they could consent or not consent.
Yeah, I remember, sorry, Dr. Mack, but like just one seminar I was in where the professor said, "Oh, I will only work with two of you as my, like I will only advise two of you." And then I remember going to his office hours and he's like, "I'll work with you if you want." I didn't end up choosing him, but it was just interesting to me how this self-selection operates even in Scientology or Bikram. I will only allow a few of you to take class from me and training, and then you can be my teachers. Like you can then train others, but I only will allow contact with a few people.
But it's brilliant if you think about it, because it incentivizes people to do more. And it goes back to what Dr. Mack was talking about, which, you know, it's a form of grooming. And so the pyramid kind of thing, like the better you are, the more loyal you are, the higher up you are going to get into the hierarchy or whatever. It's a brilliant strategy of grooming to get people to, I want to do more. I want to do better.
And they're high achieving.
Smart.
It's a high achieving group. It's like if you join the military or something else like that, or if you join a sorority or a fraternity, there's like that, there may be some personality traits that attracted to that particular group in the first place. If you're going into academia, you're already a high achiever. You've already invested however much time and money, and maybe your family is depending on you. And so you're kind of, I want to be special, especially if, I don't know about all of you, but you know, if you're an undergrad and you stand out, you may not feel as much competition as you do whenever you hit more higher level, like higher education. And so it's a first time maybe for some people that their ego is being maybe threatened a little bit. And so this, you know, they're showing you attention. And Andrew, to your, I mean, my program, I think is like a we can differentiate it because there was a lot of abuse and toxicity. I'll be coming up, I don't know, on the season of my podcast, and legal issues, restraining orders against faculty. I don't think it was a cult though, because they came out too heavy hitting, because there was some probably psychopathy personality stuff in there. And so the neon sign, there was group, but it was like so obvious that people were not vying for it. So in my mind, that's like an example of like, it doesn't feel like a cult because no one's like buying into this particular program. They're buying in academia. We just have to suffer through it, but we're not idealizing it. We recognize this is toxic and abusive. And so to me, that like differentiates it, because we all were very quick to catch on of what's happening here. And so the rose colored glasses were taken off, so to speak. But I think because they weren't regulated enough maybe to be able to have those like subtle tactics like I've seen in other programs or maybe academia in general. And that might be, I guess, a clear distinction, I guess, my program of this is toxic and abusive versus this is culty. But yeah, high achieving groups. It's so competitive already. And like, I'm thinking law school or med school too, where you're literally law school, you're ranked against other students as well. So yeah, it's just set up in this brilliant way. Dr. Haji.
And I really want to say something about grooming here, because this has been on my mind recently around like really effective grooming is when you can get someone convinced that they chose it, that they want it. That's how a lot of these coercive groups will work, is that they, you know, even if you're a little skeptical in the beginning, you're sort of like, I don't know. But as soon as that really effective grooming, that step-by-step boundary encroachment, taking away small decisions that you would normally make for yourself, making you think that maybe you had the wrong impression, you got this wrong, the gaslighting, like you do that stepwise enough. And I think eventually, like in Scientology, people get to the top and they're like, I wanted this. This was what I wanted with my whole chest. And that is confusing when they're wanting something that is pretty unhealthy and also like doesn't serve them in any way any longer. But they've done this this work. This is one of the things we talk about a lot in cult research, is the idea of sunken cost. That once you invest enough time, you start looking back over your timeline and you're like, well, I've already given 3 years. I can't quit now. And this happens a lot in academia, actually. Like in my grad school, I remember I hit a wall 3.5 years into a 5-year doctorate. And I just remember thinking, I can't give up now. Where am I going to go? And like, what job takes a half doctorate? 0 of them. So it was like, that is that same psychology that happens actually in cult indoctrination, is I've already given up all of my money. My family is already in, I've sold my house and moved to the compound. I have, you know, whatever the sunken cost is, they get too far down the road and it feels like way too much to give that up. Way too much.
Yeah,
Dr.
that's so
Haji.
true.
Yeah. Dr. Haji, I'm just curious, have you seen anything similar as far as like gangs and prisons and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about what Dr. Gideon was talking about. The sunken cost is so interesting because it's like anything else. Once you've already committed and, you know, sacrificed. I remember that same thing when I was in school. I couldn't pass stats for the life of me. Okay. I kept failing stats and I was in my clinical director's office and I was like, I'm never going to be a doctor. And she was like, okay, calm down, take a breath and get a tutor. But I was like, I can't pass stats. Like it was traumatizing. I can't pass stats. I'm never going to be a doctor. So, but I think when it comes to gangs, it's the same kind of concept. You know, they're groomed the same way. And, you know, when you look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you see the love and belonging. I think it's in the middle. I could be wrong. You know, I see a lot of my juveniles coming from quote unquote broken homes. You know, dad is in prison, mom is drug addicted, they're in and out of foster care. And then all of a sudden, you know, these peers, these cool peers are giving them time, attention, protection, maybe even food and money. These are impoverished kids. So all of a sudden, you know, it's grooming, but it's also like, where else is this kid supposed to go? Right. And then slowly it's, well, maybe you can pick up drugs for me. Well, maybe you can sell drugs for me. Maybe, and then inside the correctional facilities, it's maybe you can smuggle in contraband. Maybe you can do a hit. And the next thing you know, you're full blown into 100% crazy criminal activity that you wouldn't have otherwise chosen to do on your own, but you're in too deep. You're in too deep. And I talk to these kids and I'm like, how did this kid get so far into the gang? But if you backpedal and backtrack how it started and where they are now, it makes total clinical sense, and of course, much like cults, the high ranking members of gangs are usually charming, high on psychopathy, narcissistic, coercive, abusive. So it's really similar in that respect.
Mm-hmm. So what would you also, now I want you to think obviously in terms of your own specialties, what would you say some of the main obstacles that those who are leaving, say a gang or academia or a cult or extremist religious group, what kind of really like insane obstacles have to go through both psychologically and from a societal standpoint?
I mean, there was I was just going to say in the in the humanities I can speak to, I feel like those I knew who left the PhD with their masters, there was judgment passed on them that I never understood. And I was that like truth teller who definitely always spoke out when I was supposed to be silent. Like, it's okay for you to disagree with academia, but you better not blast out your critiques because you now are seen as persona non grata, which I definitely was. I mean, I had on the podcast, as Mary knows, but Dr. Helena Darwin speaking out about sexual abuse from the sociology department at Stony Brook. And that was definitely, I mean, it was so brave of her. And she's courageous. But like, even there was someone I knew in the English department who sadly, she had called me and she had suicidal ideation and told me she was going to throw herself off a bridge in Manhattan. And I reported that instantly to my department. And they were like, well, we'll try to have someone from counseling seek her. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, she's reaching out to me. Like, this is very serious. And then unfortunately, a year went by, and then the next year she did commit suicide and she was still in the program. And I'm like, how did this even happen? Like, and people are like, well, just don't talk about it. Sweep it under the rug. And I'm like, no, this is awful. Like, this was someone under your tutelage, like whose family lives nowhere nearby. Things like that, I just didn't understand. Why were we not trying to provide a solution? Why were we trying to hide issues like of mental health, especially? Like, what happens when someone does have mental health issues that need to be addressed? And we need to respect those who are entering a program, who are not going to just take it and be okay with, being okay with injustices within academia.
And the irony that this is our field.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the amount of stories I have of, including myself, just completely emotionally abused during pre-doctoral internship. I have students who are going through it right now. I have Dr. Mack's, horrific story. Like, it doesn't end. It doesn't end. It's still happening. And I remember when I called the APA, I decided to call the APA to report my pre-doctoral internship long after I was licensed. I was like, let me get licensed. Let me be on my own. Let me be far away, far removed, and then I'll report them. And the APA said to me, well, we can take the report, but you know, psychology is a small world, and so you'll be open to retaliation. Do you really want to do this? And it was like, good point. No, I don't.
Yeah. I called them too,
Yeah.
during my program, and they said, well, they have the right to face their accusers, including the program. And so your name will be on it. And I was like, well, one of these faculty members literally was dead. So like, I don't think that's gonna really work out for me too well. But the consequences, I mean, for like, we're social creature. I've been reading a lot of social psychology stuff recently. And actually, Dr. Gideon, I've been listening to LA Not So Confidential. I don't know if you listen to that podcast, but they're in LA. So I was listening to their hazing episode the other day, by the way. And so that sometimes might be in there, but just the social cohesion, and you're isolated a lot of times. I'm probably not in every single cult, but there's this isolation that happens. So what do you like? It's similar to intimate partner violence in a way of like, you may not have the resources to leave. You've been maybe isolated or alienated in some ways. It's the sunken cost thing, 100%. And then they even have to have the insight to begin with that they were groomed, or that wasn't their idea. And so that is some really difficult dissonance to experience or confront if we bring that to a conscious level, because how do we experience dissonance unless it's like at this very conscious level, which now means there's some internal conflict, and how do we resolve that, especially depending on the group and your situation. If you're totally isolated, or Lina, I didn't even think about, that was probably a bias of mine. I didn't even think about gangs kind of falling into this. That's my bias. And of course, like I've worked in corrections too, and thinking that, and literally don't have access to food consistently, or food insecurity, or your family was in the gang, all these different factors. And we're social creatures. And so in my mind, that just very much comes in addition to how much you've already sacrificed, or like all these other factors. Maybe if it's after a life event, well, what does that mean? What did that event mean to me then? That I went through this, I was suffering, and I sought this thing out, like twin flames or teal swan. Those are the two coming to my mind right now about that specifically. And what happens then? Like, what does it mean? How do I make meaning out of that? And that just comes up for me when I think about some of the consequences, like broader scope.
Yeah, from my perspective, there's not like a single category in your life that is safe from a cult when you've been indoctrinated, and when you have sort of lived your life according to the doctrine of this cult. So the ramifications can be deep and wide and horrifying. It can move anywhere between some groups require that you give a certain amount of your money, and as soon as you stop doing that, they will track you down. They know where you are. They know your last 5 known addresses. Some places will make you give over all of your assets as a way of being super pious and showing your commitment. So where are you going to go? To what house? And your family's mad at you because you gave up the family farm while doing it, because you had to do that with this group. And so where exactly are you going to go? A lot of them will require that your life and social circle get really small. So they restrict which jobs you can get. They restrict which food you can eat. They restrict which medical intervention you can receive. And so when your life gets that small, like what sort of doctor are you going to come in contact with you're like, something is really bad here? You don't, because you're not allowed to go to that doctor. You're literally not allowed to seek medical help in that way. So there's a lot of like logistical ways in which these groups will like really hold people kind of inside, just by disempowering them from having other options. And then there's also the psychological, which I think everyone has sort of hit on here today. It's the idea of sunken cost. It's how much of the messages have been internalized. So like a lot of evangelical Christians that are coming out of super high control groups, they have a ton of fear of God's punishment in hell. They have internalized a message. They may even like cognitively be like, I don't even know if I believe in that anymore, but they've internalized such a message of violence that they literally cannot make themselves leave a group for fear that God is going to be violent with them. the God of the universe that can see all things and is all knowing and all consuming, is not going to allow me to get away with this. So it really kind of depends, but it can come from all angles. And usually folks have been told that they have to isolate themselves from the people who are naysayers. That's creating that in-group versus out-group sort of dynamic. And so those folks are not going to have a ton of social support. Usually they will come to like a group like mine where there's like survivors, they get to be anonymous, they get to like ask their questions. And then I always tell anyone, do not leave for 6 months. You're not ready. You've got money you got to put aside. You have got to figure out where the hell you're going. You got to figure out the bus system. Like you cannot walk from that part of this isolated rural community to this city and not get caught. You don't know how to live in the woods. Like you are not ready. You have got to stay where you are, fake it as long as you can, and we've got to get a plan together. Like this stuff can get really scary.
Well,
That's so
Dr.
important.
Gideon, yeah, is that like disconnection? Because that's something that I've been really drawn to, like with Leah Remini's account, is the subversive person and the disconnection. Like you've talked about the in versus out. Scientology, I mean, to its credit, actually names what they're doing, which is disconnection. So, like, they're telling us their playbook. But is that the disconnection? That's something that then exists in, you would say, in every type of cult apparatus. Is there's always
Yeah.
that we're going to break you away from family and friends who don't agree with our practices.
Yeah, something becomes a cult when they say we have knowledge, we have power, we have magic that no one else has. And you only get access to it by fidelity to our group. And so by function of that, outsiders are going to be against you. They're going to try to talk you out of it. They're going to try to pull you out of it. They're going to not believe you because they aren't in the group and therefore they don't have access to the magic. So I think that like the very function of how a group becomes pretty culty means that there has to be like a dangerous other outside of the group, and that can be fictional. Like in QAnon, it's literally a made up government cabal. It can be fictional in like a religious setting where there's like eternal damnation and hell and suffering from like a mean God. It can be like real threats, like we will come and hunt you down. We will take away your children if you've had them in the group. And there's actually good case law that says that these groups can make good arguments that that mother or that father is not a good parent, because they'll sort of show all of their like breakdowns, right, that they've had because they're in the cult, and that will be used against them. So the costs are super high, and the groups that function like this are not going to stop just because you say, no, thank you, I don't want to be here anymore. That's not how this works. There's like an intensity around how true they believe they are and how much they believe that they have to protect the group from people leaving, and therefore, like, I don't know, like defecting and pulling other people away, bringing law enforcement. Like there's a lot to be worried about here, according to them, according to the insiders of a cult.
Yeah, and it's so multi-layered. Like everything you just listed, there's the psychological component, and there's also financial exploitation that you touched on. Like I was looking at domestic violence like pamphlets or domestic violence brochures that I ran across the other day, and it said something like 5 ways to leave a domestic violence relationship. Make a plan, save some money. And it was like, okay, there's the logistical stuff you were just talking about, Dr. Gideon, the fact that they don't know how to take the bus. I find it so interesting that you had said, fake it for 6 months because you literally don't know the bus route. And that is something that we don't even think about. We just think, okay, stop being brainwashed. You figured it out and now get up and leave. It's not that simple. Whether it's a gang where a gang, you leave a gang, the cost could be death to you, death to your family. They're not messing around. Or a domestic violence relationship, or, so I saw this brochure, which was clearly outdated and made by God knows what, but it just listed like 3 things: make a plan, get some money, and call someone. And it's like, oh, okay, that's
Sure.
We hadn't thought about
Yeah.
that. Thank
Cool.
you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, our phones haven't been tracked, right?
Mhm.
So
Right.
it's totally safe. to
Yeah,
make a call.
right.
Yeah.
For sure. So my last question for you all. Leah Remini was introduced to Scientology as a younger person and kind of sort of grew up in the religion. So what are the differences between those who are born into essentially a religion versus those who join later in life, if any?
Happy to jump in here. When someone grows up in a high control, highly restrictive, coercive environment, they are going to miss some big developmental steps. So the rest of us that might join in our 30s because we've had some sort of like breakdown and we're like, we need this sort of change, or we have had a spiritual experience that changes what we want in life. We got relatively, most of the time, this is not all the time, but most of the time, we got relatively normal development. We got to date, we got to kiss, we got to go see movies. We got to read books that they had. We got to go to school, which a lot of these groups don't allow. We got to figure out emotional stuff, like what do you do when you feel angry? Instead of like shutting down or punching someone, what do you do? Like that, those are huge things when it comes to how someone is going to recover from trauma. When you grow up in a group like this and you start missing those steps because the group will not allow them, like a lot of times like Mormon communities or evangelical Christians will talk about like how dangerous feelings are. So we've got an entire generation of people that's not growing up with any sort of emotional intelligence or wherewithal around what to do when they feel really like unpleasant feelings, which means they're going to get behavioral, which means they're going to be problematic. Like this stuff really parlays into like a whole life. And so those that kind of grow up being really restrictive, not reading books, not going to school, not having social interactions outside of the group, they might defect. They can, this happens. But when they do, they are totally lost. And a lot of times they have like the emotional kind of capacity of a very young child. So they're in an adult body, but they're trying to go to the bank and they don't know how to open a checking account and they don't know if they have a social security. They didn't even know that that was a thing, right? Like this stuff can really, really make huge differences. It also, like when you grow up in a group like this, there's a sect, a religious sect that really requires women. It's called a quiverful theology. It requires women to have as many babies as their bodies will allow, which means that they'll have something, like 15 or 20 children sometimes.
Like
When
the
you
Duggars.
grow up in, yes, the Duggars, when you grow up in an environment like that, what happens when you start having babies? Now you've got children and you have this delayed emotional development and you're supposed to go out there and like find someone else that's going to also take care of these children. Not going to happen, right? So this it has a big impact, really. I mean, in perfect scenario, we would have someone, if they're going to join a cult, joins, in their late 30s, get out by their early 40s, we can deal with that trauma. It's still complex, it's still awful. They might have like given up their, entire family inheritance. We can live with that as long as they can get out safely. But it's those that have been in for decades that just have a really hard time reimagining what life can be.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe it's because I always want to find a remedy, but I know there's not always remedies. But like people listening now, I'm sure they're thinking, wait, am I in a cult? Like, wait, am I in restricted community settings? Like, is there anything we can learn? Like, hopefully we're not in that kind of like Dr. Haji's experience with like gang type of res- the norms that go on in there with whole like thinking, or Dr. Gideon in your setting, or Dr. Mack with like the grooming in academia, Mary, what you observe with true crime. What can we learn though? Hopefully, if we're not in those types of restricted communities that like just keep us grounded or maybe connected to those who can keep us in check, like to make sure that we're not starting to fall prey to cult-like thinking.
Is there a narcissistic leader? Can you dissent? How bad is the punishment if you don't follow all of the rules? And can you leave at any time? I think that's a good place to start.
Love that.
Mhm.
Most people can't leave, and that's usually where they like start
Yeah.
with their
Well, that's helpful.
deconstruction. Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. Real quick, I just want to go around starting with Dr. Gideon. What have you got going on? Where can people find you? What are you up to?
I spend most of my time online on Instagram, and I'm at Dr. Quincee there. And although less these days because my eyes cross, there's so much going on. But I have a community of cult survivors that are figuring it out in an anonymous sort of setting. I have you join the group for 12 months because we need slow paced recovery in order for you to not totally freak out and fall apart. And so that's why we built it the way that we have. And so, but it's there, it's available. I would love to have you and support you in that way. And then I also have a group of therapists that I teach how to deal with religious trauma, coercive control, and abusive dynamics. When someone comes into therapy and they're like, this is what's going on, I want therapists to feel like, no problem, I got you. And so I teach therapists how to do that. And you can find all of that on Instagram.
Dr. Lina Haji, what do you got going on?
Same. I have a private practice where I do 99% forensic work. It's called Rise Psychological. And I just came out on a true crime documentary. It's on Film Rise, Roku, and IMDb. It's supposed to be getting picked up by Paramount Plus, but we shall see. It's called World's Most Evil Prisoners, and I'm talking about a bunch of fun psychopaths. You can check that out. And yeah, IG, Rise Psychological Services.
And Dr. Mac, what have you got going on?
Too many Lena's nodding. I am running my own private practice, doing the podcast, finally coming back from a hiatus soon. The next full season will be deviating from our normal expert interview style, and we'll be going through step by step from like what happened in my program. So we will be talking about some of these things that we talked about today. And Lina, am I missing anything?
You are missing a lot, but that's the gist, and it's Revealing the Ivory Tower podcast.
I think I didn't even mention it. This is why I have her.
All right. Thank you all so much for being here. And until next time, my loves, I will see you all later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That was so much fun.
That was Dr.